And as we struggle back to autonomy, we will hopefully relearn the valuable lessons about the equal place of women in our traditional societies that have always existed. And so I invite Jill to come up. We had a discussion on Wednesday, and we'll review some of that material, but I want Jill just to first introduce herself and offer her words on the topic today.
Sure. Good morning. Is that close enough? I love United Churches because everybody responds. I've been part of the Anglican Church for a while, and nobody responds to anything. So it's nice. So I'm a registered psychologist and sexual health educator. Most of what I do is talk about sex in church, which is, how many people here heard sex talked about in church growing up? Yeah. So that's usually how it goes. But I think it's really important, especially with the conversations that are happening today about Me Too and about consent. And I think the church has a really big part of sexual silence and sexual violence because we don't talk about sex in church. And so I think that's one way we contribute to this conversation. If we don't talk about sexuality in church, it shows that that isn't safe to talk about. And so for people who are victims of violence or sexual assault, the church isn't a place they feel safe going. And as we know, it's something that happens in our church walls too. And then the second thing I think with church is that we send a lot of women or messages to women about sexuality and that their worth is in their sexuality, so virginity or purity. And then if people have experienced sexual violence or sexual assault, it sends a message of feeling unworthy and unsafe in the church too. So I think the church has a lot to do with this conversation. I know it's not easy because we don't talk about it, but I really am so grateful to be here and excited to talk about it more.
And so, sure I'm not on mute anymore. And so part of your background has been involved with the church and with your training?
Yes. Yeah, so I was not raised in the church. My dad's here, but I always make this joke. I was raised by feminist atheists, and so my way of rebelling was going to church. Yeah. Actually, Bob, you baptized me. I don't know if you remember that, but so I got excited when I saw him this morning. I was like, he baptized me when I was a teenager. My journey wasn't growing up in the church, and my family was super open talking about sex and sexuality and gender, and then when I got to the church and we didn't talk about it, I felt really confused by that. And so a lot of my journey was feeling like I had to hide pieces of myself to belong in the church, which didn't feel right. So yeah, I've church shopped at lots of different churches. Was baptized United. I've experienced in evangelical churches, Pentecostal. I went to a Christian university, and then somehow landed in the Anglican church. Somebody told me it was like the United Church mixed with Catholic Church. It's not like that at all. And then when I was at a Christian university, I realized how much people don't talk about sex, and so I realized I would love to get some more education on that. So I was a sexual health educator at a local agency here for a while, and a lot of the extra training that I do on top of being a psychologist is related to sex and gender and Christianity. Yeah.
And so about some of your work with youth and with different communities.
Yeah, well, so my background is mostly working with high-risk youth and their families. And then somehow I ended up being a youth pastor. Again, I don't really know how I landed there, but I was a youth pastor for 5 years, which is a really long time to sleep on church floors and eat junk food. So my background was working with high-risk youth, and then eventually I started working with families. And then I worked in an addictions treatment center with young women, 18 to 24, struggling with trauma. So it was a trauma-based center, trauma and addictions. And then I started private practice, and now I'm teaching at Mount Royal some counseling skills in child and youth care programs, so to people that are just starting in the field, which I'm excited about. Yeah.
Okay, and today, as our topic of sexual ethics within the church, but also the Me Too movement, what are the primary focus of the church and the people we have today, especially in Calgary? How
Yeah, kind of like I said at the beginning, my biggest fear is us not talking about sex. So that's most of my work, is trying to get us to just have conversations about sexuality. A lot of what I do too is kind of deconstructing the messages we did have about sexuality. So if we didn't talk about it, one thing, but then the messages that we did have. And so that's a lot of the work I do, is we don't realize how much we carry with us. There's a lot of church jargon about sex. One of my favorite is modest is hottest. I don't know if you know that one. It's a fun one. But we have lots of jargon. And so I think for my work is challenging that, taking away the stigma, having us talk about what it did to us as individuals and then as a church, as a system. And so that's the work I do.
Okay, and we'll have music, and then we'll continue with our conversation. The next thing that we wanted to talk about was a bit about the Me Too movement and a bit about sort of some of the rules and some of the norms that have been broken by that, and how it's important to kind of reorient ourselves in this time now.
Yeah, that's great. So the history of Me Too starts actually in early 2000 by a woman of color who had experienced sexual assault as a child. And so she started the hashtag Me Too so that she could show other girls and women of color and racialized folks that they weren't alone. And so last year in the fall, we had, Kesha, who this song is by, was one of the women who started speaking out in the music industry against people sexually abusing her, and some sexual assault. So in the fall, we had celebrities calling out people like Harvey Weinstein, and then the tweet kind of became viral. So it became a thing of, if you've experienced this, all you have to do is put Me Too. You don't have to tell your story, but it just shows that we're in solidarity with each other. So I'm sure you saw it all over the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. People were posting Me Too. And so, yeah, it is breaking the rules and the norms, because a lot of our society is silencing, normalizing behaviors, and normalizing the actions of in power, I would say, when people aren't in power, that they can't say something. And it was a really powerful thing that people came together through the Me Too movement. So,
and it's helping to condition our way of interacting and engaging with each other. Mm-hmm. And I think that the video that we have will show that. Again, yeah. Here,
can I pause 2 seconds? So I think one thing too that happens when I talk in churches is sometimes people don't even realize what sexual assault is or what sexual violence is. And so this can be really triggering, and it's a simple T video and even the conversations we're having, but often what happened with Me Too as well, I think, empowered people to say, oh, that wasn't okay, that wasn't right, and it's okay for me to tell somebody about that. And so if that happens for somebody here today, if you have a memory that comes into your head, or maybe feeling like this is a time that you can feel safe, there's lots of people to talk to. I think the leadership team here, there's resources in our community, and it's just super important to name, but because it's a simple consent video, but it brings up a lot, I think. So, yeah.
And so it's good to have that information as well.
Yeah.
So we'll go ahead with the video.
Sounds good.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they go, oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you. Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please. That's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
What we need are some tools in the end. What we need are some understandings and some ability to respect people, respect their decisions, and respect treating people in a similar way, and to understand that we need to engage them on a human level, and remember some of our sort of teachings of Christ in that type of direction versus what we assume or what we have been living with under the current culture.
And one thing I like to emphasize is the church is a space of power. It is. It holds a lot of power in our culture. And so when somebody is walking into our space as a guest or as a new person or maybe as a visitor of a friend, they're automatically in a position of less power. And so consent is a lot about power and negotiating. And if we know that as a church that this is a place of power, we need to understand how we can empower the people in our church. So how can we give them power? And I think that is the story of the resurrection and the story of Jesus, is he gives a lot of power to people that didn't have power. And so, I think that's probably where I would start, is acknowledging that this is what the system is. And then even in our roles in the church, how we have power and how we can make other people feel safe. Because when people feel like they're not in a position of power, they feel like they have to say yes, right? So, go into the area for tea after, people feel like they have to have tea because they have less power. So just I'll leave that there and we can come back to some of that.
And so on our final thoughts for this topic, I think it's important that we reflect upon our relationships and our interactions and be aware of whether we're treating people as we want to be treated and as they should be treated, to understand and be accepting of one another, and to, I think a lot of it has to do with forgiveness, and that's a long-term journey.
Yeah. And I would say my challenge to the church as a whole is to look at our messages of sex and sexuality. What are the messages that we got when we didn't talk about it? What are the messages that we did get? The church jargon. What did those messages say to us? So how did they stop us from being in whole relationship with ourselves? And then how does it stop us from loving others? Because that's a lot of the stories that I hear are people who said, this happened to me in the church, and people not believing them, and people just saying, oh, well, that's a sexual sin. We'll just put that over there. And then we kind of shun them from the church. And so I would say, yeah, the first thing is acknowledging your messages and then acknowledging how those messages impact you loving others. That's my challenge.
Okay, well, we thank you for coming out today. I think we'll have our next song. And yeah, if anybody wants to have additional talks, Jill is a resource. We can contact her or meet with her afterwards if you wanted to schedule some sort of talk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.